Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. We're back with another indie comic review, as you might have guessed, given that my face is in front of you instead of the drawing board. We are looking at Kamen America Volume 4, which just came in this week. I've given it the requisite 2 readings and a couple of days to think about it, and I have many thoughts. Let's get right into it by looking at the form factor. It's iconic comics, it's a hardback, and it's everything you expect from those two things put together. It looks great, it feels great in the hand, the paper stock is great, the printing quality is great. Iconic Comics has found a great printer to work with, an API print, and they continue to do a great job designing their covers, giving them appealing graphics, and generally knocking this part of the indie comic package out of the park. If you think you can get a better hardback product than this from the big two, you are wrong, sir. If the durability and pleasingness to the eye is the only thing you take into account when looking at the outside of a book, Iconic Comics is the best in the game, mainstream or independent. That's just the way it is. So, how is the art inside? Well, Timothy Lim has really perfected what I think is a good cartoony, slightly cartoony, but pretty realistic, sort of middle grade style. And if you're not familiar with publishing lingo, middle grade refers to people who are in middle school or the first couple of years of high school. This has a target audience probably between the ages of 12 and 16, first and foremost. It would look really nice animated and put on in a 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. time slot on TV. It would be great fun for kids to watch with the whole family, but it's a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too gritty for younger children. I would say, while you would have to obviously take your kid into account, I would think this would be a 12 and up product. So, that has more to do with the storytelling and the art, really, but the art is also styled to be appealing to people in that demographic. So, what do I think Tim could improve on? Well, I've always said that I would like to see sound effects worked into the composition a bit more. I'm not going to harp on that. I know that they use pre-generated sound effects as a time-saving measure. There are business considerations there. It's not really something you can quickly work up to, or even necessarily not every artist will have the right sense for that kind of composition. And it's not bad. It's just, something I've always thought would be nice to see. I do have a second critique here, however, and this is the first time I can recall in any of the Timothy Lim illustrated stories that I've read where we have a large amount of very serious downer moments. And what I mean by that is I mean people who are nervous, people who are concerned for the welfare of others, people who are sad, people who are even just wistful, thinking about the past. And Lim's acting in these situations is not great. What do I mean by that? Well, when you are the illustrator of a comic book, you are everything. You are the camera, you are the actors, you are the lights, and specifically in the case of acting, while Lim has an exaggerated style that serves very well in showing moments of frustration or anger or even comical concern, he's not quite as good at showing the more serious elements of the storytelling that we have in this particular narrative. And I think probably honestly, a lot of face study to kind of capture those emotions would have helped this story come off a little bit better. And, obviously you can do work from real life to explore that. But for Lim, I think it's also would be beneficial to look specifically at the facial illustrations as composed by Naoki Urasawa, who has an incredible ability to convey emotion with just a handful of lines and a little bit of screen tone. And I think that if there's going to continue to be these kind of moments in the story as it goes on, doing some of that work, adapting some of those techniques, and doing a lot of study from real life would help to sell some of these more serious emotions later in the story. It's not that I didn't buy them or find them convincing. I just don't think they were conveyed as well as they could have been. Lim is extremely talented. He works very hard. And I think this is an area where he could apply himself and really really improve the quality of his visual storytelling in ways that just integrating your sound effects into the background of your panel layouts is not going to. That would be nice to see, but it's not really going to change the effect of the storytelling like really mastering those more serious expressions would. Let's talk about the storytelling. And from this point forward, there are going to be spoilers. I have tried to avoid them to the best of my ability when reviewing Kamen America 3, and also I believe Black Ops X Kamen America. I don't remember if I dodged them the entire time, but now we have to talk about the big reveal at the end of KA3. So if you haven't read that and you don't want it spoiled, now is the time to leave. And seriously, what are you waiting for? Go read up on the rest of the Kamen America franchise. In the meantime, we have to talk about the revelation that Vicky, who is Carly's best friend and has been since childhood, was actually the villain that has been stalking her, for lack of a better word, throughout most of the series. Yes, there have been side villains who are also involved in this plot that were not necessarily setting Vicky into motion. Of course, Carly came across Apex Moth. But Vicky is the one who's been creating the monsters Carly has been defeating, and she's the one that's been beneath the mask of mud that made up Vermilion Masquerade's face. So, we now have a very interesting moment of conflict that Carly has to work out. As I mentioned before, all of the Kamen Corps, except, well, in her own way, including Sylvia, Kamen Victory, were empowered by a comet that fell from space, and they got the 4 basic elements as their powers. Excepting, again, Sylvia. So Carly is, she is Kamen America, and she has lightning powers, and we have Kamen Comet, Misha, who has fire powers, and then we have Kamen Udon, Kimi, who has water powers, and finally we have Vermilion Masquerade, who has earth powers. She has also been empowered by an as of yet unnamed supervillain who seems to have been working behind the scenes for some time. We don't know a whole lot about that. Excuse me. So I'm going to just leave that there. Her powers are a stage beyond those of the rest of the. I can't say the rest of the Kamen Corps because Vicky does not join the Kamen Corps, which is kind of a subversion of my expectations. To be honest, I had expected that, in classic shonen storytelling styles, the one who looks like an enemy would become a friend. Well, it turns out the one who looked like an enemy was a friend, sort of, all along. So, well done there, Pellegrini. The setup is classic. You can call it Captain Planet. You can call it 4 elements, whatever. But Sylvia has powers that come from pieces of the comet, basically. Or I think it was a satellite, actually. Pieces of the satellite have been salvaged into a suit she wears that gives her some ability to interface with powers, but she doesn't have true powers herself. She just has this technological suit. And now that we have these 4 basic roles filled out, there is dissension in the ranks because Vicky, she doesn't like being in Carly's shadow, and she feels like she's been there her whole life. And that's a very believable motivation for a villain. I have had people who have been parts of my friend group at times who felt overshadowed or otherwise slighted by the rest of the group and became hostile to it. So I find Vicky to be a very believable and even sympathetic villain in the role of Vermilion Masquerade. And we see also how the various pieces of the puzzle that have been set up so far kind of conspired to trap Vicky in this kind of unfortunate role. However, ultimately, it's not really a trap. Vicky had the powers. She could have just not gone along with this plan that was set out. She seems to have lacked a certain degree of confidence her whole life. And we see at the beginning of this an interesting inversion of Carly's origin story. They both have a teacher who thinks they should do more scientific things with their life. And both of them have very girly interests. Carly wants to make clothing, and at a very basic level, Vicky wants to be an artist. She likes to sculpt, which plays very well into the eventual uses she will find for her powers. And Vicky chooses, because she is very gifted in math, where Carly doesn't seem to be, she chooses to pursue science instead and have sculpting as a hobby. And that kind of hit me where I live. If you it's not something I talk about very often, but I did briefly study engineering rather than writing because I figured, much like Vicky did, hey, I can be an engineer in the day and I can write as a hobby, and maybe I will eventually get published that way. I didn't realize, nor did the people who gave me that advice seem to appreciate, just how big a time commitment and a passion commitment writing is if you want to do it and be recognized for it, which I did and I still do. And Vicky, in choosing to become a geologist, has to take up something else that requires an incredible amount of time and passion and commitment to do, and it just crowds out what she always hoped to be. And again, having almost walked that path myself and felt the effects of it to a certain extent during my college career, I really sympathize with the way Vicky feels. Now, I know that's not going to be a universal experience, but take it from someone who has actually lived that path. It can be very difficult. And to their credit, Lim and Pellegrini managed to give Vicky a really great and understandable character arc through that story. And at the same time, it's pretty clear that she's still a villain that has to be dealt with. And the story makes no bones about that either. Carly eventually is willing to confront and defeat Vicky because she sees that Vicky has chosen a path that is destructive to herself and others. And I think that's an interesting outcome for the final story, the final chapter of the first story arc in Kamen America, because it shows that while Carly is a very aspirational hero who always strives to do the right thing and who really values her friends and the people around her, she's not always going to understand the people around her, and she's not always going to be able to do something that immediately looks beneficial to them. Now, at the very end, we do have a setup for the Black Ops Kamen America Soul Finder crossover, which is something I never thought I would say, a Soul Finder being a very different beast from the general vibe of Black Ops and Kamen America. But it's coming, and there is some possibilities for redemption. And most importantly, and most satisfying for me personally, there is a sign that there's going to have to be a change of spirit in some of these villainous characters. Jackalope, I believe, is the name of the Black Ops villain, who is hinted at the end here as well, who's also in custody in the same facility Vicky is kept in. And, of course, Father Redder is a priest. And there's always been a bit of a sticking point in my craw when stories do redemption arcs that don't feature a real attempt to grapple with the not just the character failings, but the spiritual hurt done to a person when they choose to do something that harms others and is just in general evil. Because Vicky doesn't really hurt a whole lot of people, but she lies an awful lot, and she hurts the relationships between herself and others, and that can't just be papered over by her deciding, I'm not going to hurt people anymore. I mean, that's great, but there's damage to yourself and others that has to be rebuilt. And I hope that when we finally see that crossover, we will see some of that forgiveness and repentance that is necessary to begin rebuilding that damage. Again, we don't get that a whole lot in comic books, but I have a lot of faith in Pellegrini. I know Ernst has read the script for that already and says it's good, and he seems to have a really solid grasp on those concepts as well. So I'm extremely optimistic that while it will take some time, we will eventually get our last member of the Kamen Corps added back in, and all will be right with the shonen formula. In the meantime, this is a really good story. I think this is the best Kamen America story out of the 4 that we've had so far, and certainly does the most to develop the characters. I do have a little bit of a sense of trepidation because this also introduced something like a love triangle between Carly and Misha, which is it's not a trope I'm a fan of. But this is a middle grade book, I believe, and middle grade readers eat that stuff up because that's middle school and high school to a T. So maybe that's shrewd writing, knowing your audience and trying to appeal to it. Maybe it's just shipping bait. Honestly, I think that Misha gels better with Sig personally, even though I am the number one Misha stan out there and everyone else can suck it. But yeah, I know that this is probably not going to be a main focus of the story going forward because it has been allowed to develop quite sedately over the course of the story so far. So I'm hoping that this doesn't take over the story, and I'm pretty confident it won't. Again, Pellegrini has done a good job balancing all this as things go forward. But it's still not a thread I'm super enthused about. I guess you will have to make what you will of that. I know that there are people who hate love triangles, there are people who love love triangles, and there are people who don't even notice them when they're brought into the story. Personally, I hope that we will not see any more than a couple pages of it per volume as we have up until this point. But otherwise, I really enjoyed this story and everything it does. So I would definitely recommend you pick it up and try it out. Or if you haven't read this, the Omnibus is also available from Iconic Comics, or I believe they have an Indiegogo going right now where you can try and pick up a copy of that. And the Omnibus is hardbacked. I know there were hardbacks of Volume 1 and 2, but I can't seem to track any down now. So that if you want a hardback version of it that you can read over and over again, I would highly recommend picking that up and enjoying the story, because this is one of the best things out there in the indie comics market right now. If you are sleeping on this, you are missing out. Definitely check out this book. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed that. You can let me know down in the comments what you thought of the end of Kamen America's first major story arc, and I'll talk to you later.